Chapter 7, Exposure 1-3. Chapter 6, Exposure 1992-1993. Percy is 16 and 29, Harry is 12, Snape is 32, Ginny is 11, Tom is 16, and Lucius Malfoy is feeling a bit reckless. June 1992, Percy does not look at the Philosopher's Stone for over a month. He's afraid to take it out, afraid Flamel may notice it missing, afraid it may be cursed. He had promised the mirror he would do no harm, but now that it is in his grasp, he desperately wishes to use it. Only for money. Percy has his limits, and is not foolish enough to think he ought to become immortal. He will only use it for gold. Instead, he reads, the elixir for gold is, while not common knowledge, not lost to memory either. Flamel published the recipe, secure in the knowledge that he alone possessed the requisite ingredient. These instructions are often used in advanced potions theory as a hypothetical exercise. Apprentices may be asked by their masters to infer the properties of the mythical philosopher's stone. Percy completes the same exercise, a pit of admiration growing in his stomach. The philosopher's stone is a feat of magic he can only dream of accomplishing one day. The stone itself must have incredible magical properties, but it is clear that Flamel had done something to enrich it, to transform it beyond a mere gem into something truly incredible. How old had Flamel been when he discovered the Philosopher's Stone? What had he been doing at 16, at 30? Even Riddle had accomplishments that far surpassed Percy's nearly 30 years of life. Percy puts his quill down, thinking about it for a second. If he does not die taking down the Dark Lord, an improbability but not an impossibility, according to his calculations, then he will be trapped in this world forever. He knew the risk when he chose this particular ritual. He will never return to his old life. But if he were to survive this next decade, well, maybe this time he'll finally have some accomplishments of his own. Are you nervous about Hogwarts? Percy asks Ginny as they walk through the garden, searching for gnomes. She shrugs and wipes a dirty hand across her nose. No, she says, fixing her gaze at the waving grass. If Ron can do it, I certainly can. I would agree, says Percy with an encouraging smile. He refuses to acknowledge the growing indecision that he feels paralyzing his upcoming choices. Should he let Ginny write in the diary? He has to, for the timeline to proceed. He can't, if he cares at all about his youngest sibling. Ginny pounces on a gnome with delight and flings it wildly over the fence. Percy watches her turn to him triumphantly, adrenaline glittering in her eyes. This is the Ginny he remembers from the end of the war, tough and flushed with energy, ready with a cutting remark or a playful comment. These last few years at home have reminded him that she was like this as a child too, invited more often than not to join in with whatever chaos Fred and George were planning. He thinks of her those weeks after her first year, withdrawn and sad, and feels guilt burn through his stomach. I'm a little concerned, I suppose, about my roommates, Ginny says after a beat, over-enunciating the adult words in an attempt to be nonchalant. What if they don't? She peters out and kicks at a clump of dirt, turning away from him. They're like you, Percy says firmly. He cannot recall in particular any of Ginny's friends, but he knows she is popular among her peers. And hopefully one day you'll try out for the Quidditch team. She flushes again, this time in delight. Only Harry Potter can make the Quidditch team in his first year, she says breathlessly. We could play together. Percy waves this aside. He has no idea how Ginny manages to outgrow this hero worship of Harry, and he wonders idly whether Harry knew about it at the time. I want you to come to me if you have any concerns, he says firmly. I told the same thing to Fred, George, and Ron. If you are having trouble making friends or with your classes, or even if you're homesick, promise me, Ginny. She wrinkles her nose at him. Okay, Mum, I promise. They continue looking for gnomes, and he lets his mind wander. Why does the chamber need to be opened? Harry rescues Ginny, which perhaps is the catalyst for their friendship and eventual romance. If Ron is to be believed, Harry slays a basilisk. Perhaps Riddle would have set the basilisk on the school. Unlikely. Such an ancient creature would hardly be a reliable weapon. Dumbledore becomes aware of the chamber. He probably puts together the clues about Riddle's return. But Percy counters himself. Dumbledore already knows that Riddle is trying to return. Dumbledore must get the diary, Percy realizes with a flash. He learns about the Horcruxes, if he did not already know. Does Dumbledore need to know about the Horcruxes? As arrogant as Percy admittedly can be, he knows he is a mere candle next to the blaze of Albus Dumbledore. It is very likely, almost certain, that Dumbledore needs to know about the Horcruxes. He likely keeps the diary and learns how to destroy it, or perhaps he does what Percy is planning, to talk to Riddle to learn the location of the other Horcruxes. Maybe Percy can simply get there first. After all, it does not matter to him who destroys the Horcruxes, as long as they are all destroyed. Right. Perhaps he can take the diary from Ginny and find out what he needs, and then leave the diary somewhere for Dumbledore to find. Why must the chamber be opened at all? He feels a terrible tug inside of him. Thus far, he's avoided changing the timeline too much, although the shining red stone in his trunk upstairs belies that statement. To prevent the chamber from opening would be a direct and intentional meddling in the timeline that he would never be able to take back. But Ginny. But Penelope and Hermione and Justin Finch-Fletchley. But that little Creevy boy who dies in the final battle. When they go inside for supper, Percy is still frozen with indecision. It feels like barely a second has passed before it is time for Percy's 2 weeks with Aunt Muriel, followed by his week with Landon. He packs up his trunk with his best robes, and after a furious internal debate, leaves the Philosopher's Stone warded and stashed under his bed. He does not want to risk a house elf finding it in his things. Aunt Muriel looks at him approvingly when he steps out of her flue. 16, she says, brushing soot off his shoulder. Nearly a man. We'll have to get you some proper robes this summer. Have you stopped growing then? You're tall enough already. The robes she buys him are exquisite, expensive, darkly colored, and new. He will not admit to anyone under pain of death, but when he returns to his room, he buries his head in the robes and breathes in their crisp store smell. He only ever wants to wear robes that smell like this. She sits him down that evening and slides a piece of parchment across the table. He scans it quickly and then meets her eyes solidly. She is to name him as her heir presumptive. Considering that Aunt Muriel or his parents are unlikely to have any more children, he may as well be the heir apparent, but to make that kind of claim would keep Percy open to attack from any of his siblings. No, this move is far preferable, and he knows that it was calculated. His aunt is very much like him, for all of her bad reputation. It probably ought to be William, his great-aunt says, flapping a hand. Such a disappointment, that boy. Head boy, and for what? So he can learn from some foreigners, and Charles gone the same way. Percy cannot prevent a smug look from crossing his face. I would be honored to be your heir, Aunt Muriel, he says and stands, sweeping her a low bow with his wand outstretched. I will uphold the honor of your legacy and of the Prewett house, and I will one day restore it to its rightful place in society. Well met, boy, she says as he settles back into his seat. You've been learning the rituals. Madame Tonks sent me an instructive guide. Perhaps you should consider marriage to that Nymphadora, Aunt Muriel muses thoughtfully. You are 5 generations removed. I shall have to check whether that is an acceptable distance. Percy only barely manages to turn his instinctive splutter into a cough. Perhaps, he says, resolutely not entertaining the idea of marrying Nymphadora Tonks. For one, she'd laugh at him. For another, he's got to be nearly twice her age. She's 19 and he is, well, he supposes he's 28, soon to be 29. Not quite twice her age, but something like it. He's closer to Snape's age than Tonks. If I accept you as my heir, upon your 17th birthday, you shall gain control over the Prewett estate, or what's left of it anyway. Of course, I shall hold the keys to the vault, but I shall authorize you a secondary pair, though you will have limited retrieval. I shan't have a 17-year-old boy fritter away his inheritance on foibles. I would never, says Percy, injured. On his quest to defeat a Dark Lord, perhaps. Perhaps, Aunt Muriel allows. Perhaps not. You shall also be eligible for the Prewett seat on the Wisengamot, but I am afraid you shall have to raise the money to claim it yourself. Never fear, you need not be on the body until you are older. You shan't have much influence now anyway. You also may change your name to Prewett, but Percival Prewett. They both give matching looks of disdain. Yes, I think for now, at least, Weasley will suit. Percy reaches out and lays his hand on her knobbled one. The alliance with Aunt Muriel in this timeline has totally taken him by surprise. If only he had known her as anything more than a grumpy old woman in his previous life. She is grumpy, for sure, and irascible and more than a bit prejudiced, but she cares deeply about the Prowett line and wants to do best by her remaining family. "Thank you, Aunt Muriel," he says again. She gives him a rare smile. "Thank you for being worthy." Asterisk Tonks gives him an ecstatic hug. "Percival Prowett," she says with a cackle. "Oh, I shan't ever call you anything else." "You can change your name to Tonks Black," he suggests, sitting hesitantly on the corner of her bed that he generally occupies. He looks around her room with interest. She no longer resides here, in her childhood bedroom, but it looks rather as if she is planning on moving back after the Aura training program is over. She's removed some of her Hufflepuff posters and replaced them with famous auras throughout history, and he spies a thick stack of Aura handbooks on her desk. He is not personally a fan of the propaganda. Most auras he knows are not nearly so attractive and determined, but each to her own. "Moving back in. The aura dorms are horrid," she says with feeling, sitting next to him. "And I'm being paid a real pittance. The ministry is only a flew away, so Mum said I could stay here." "Careful not to bring home disreputable men," he comments, thinking of Madame Tonks' disapproving looks. He cannot imagine bringing home a significant other to her and having to sit through an awkward dinner. Ted Tonks, by contrast, is a jovial and friendly man. Percy cannot understand their pairing even a little, though he can see how their union produced Tonks. She winks at him. "I never bring home disreputable men," she says. "I prefer to sneak out of their bedrooms early in the morning." "Tonks!" She dissolves into laughter at the look at his face. "Kidding, kidding. Although a man's bedroom really tells a lot about him. Does he have weird fetishes? Check in the closet for handcuffs or whips. Does his mum still do his laundry? Look at his sock drawer. If his socks are folded, run." Percy blushes harder at the thought of handcuffs or whips. He had to admit that his sex life, even before he was sent back to a prepubescent body, had hardly been anything to write home about. He and Penelope had ceremoniously lost their virginity to each other, and then there had been a date or two during his time at the ministry, and then the stress of a Dark Lord had driven all other thoughts from Percy's mind. He'd barely even taken care of himself during those last few years. Turns out constant terror and guilt was not conducive to a functioning libido. In this timeline, his body has been scrawny and young, and the thought of touching himself has turned his stomach more than once. Odd to feel pedophilic over your own body. "Oh, Perce, you'll know a girl someday," she says, waggling her eyebrows at him. "You're nearly 16. No rush. Oh, I've got you a present." She dives into the mess of bags near her bedside table, which thankfully gives Percy a second to recover. Tonks emerges with a gorgeous statue of a snow-white lynx. He catches his breath and stares at it. Its white fur is luminescent, and as she passes it to him, he feels how smooth the carving is, how solid it is in his hands. "It's beautiful," he murmurs. "And useful," she adds excitedly. "It's made of moonstone, so you can enchant it with a protective ward and it'll enhance the properties." "Always an aura." Tonks nudges him. "Don't lie you're dying to research it. Always a swat." This he can't deny. He pockets it carefully, feeling rather warm. It's the first birthday present he can remember receiving from a non-family member since he dated Penelope. Nearly 12 years ago now. July 1992, 2 nights after his return to the burrow, Percy hears a great disturbance downstairs. It sounds like somebody bumped into the dining table and knocked over a clattering of wooden chairs. Clutches his wand and casts a detection spell directly toward his floor, but it does not whine to indicate intruders, so the disturbance must be Weasley made. He rolls his eyes. Some twin nonsense, most likely. Still grasping his wand, he creeps quietly downstairs under a disillusionment charm. Ron, Fred, and George are all arguing in the kitchen. 2 wooden chairs are turned over on the floor. Percy rolls his eyes again. Not a single other Weasley seems to understand the concept of subtlety. "I'm coming," Ron whisper shouts, his fists screwed up in anger. "He's my friend." "You can't drive, Ronikins," Fred says dismissively. "He's searching through a drawer and making quite a clatter. It's a wonder their parents haven't come downstairs yet." "Neither can you." Percy cancels his charm and steps into the kitchen. He has a fairly good idea of what is happening right now, if he is remembering his timeline right. His father had nearly lost his job over this little debacle, so he'd have been hard-pressed to forget it. "Evening," he greets them, enjoying the way all 3 jump. He does notice that none of them go for their wands, which he supposes is fair, given that it is the summer holiday, but they ought to begin honing their resources now. Perhaps he can start hexing them at random opportunities, just to get their guard up a little. Stinging charms. Having a midnight adventure, are we? Crikey, Percy, you sound just like Snape, George grumbles, turning back to his search. Be quiet, will you? What are you doing? Making a midnight cake, what does it look like we're doing? Fred snaps back, looking for father's keys. George, Fred, and Ron turn to him as one. Percy smirks. Why are you trying to steal the car, then? Fred and George exchange looks, but Ron, sensing an ally, steps forward. It's Harry, he says breathlessly. He's not answered letters all summer. His uncle, his family there. Evil, Percy interjects drolly. He vaguely remembers that Harry does not get along well with his muggle relatives. Unsurprising, to look after your dead sister's child, and a magical one at that, and a boy with a price on his head. He wouldn't enjoy looking after Harry either. Ron nods furiously, unaware of the sarcasm in Percy's voice. We have to rescue him. Percy thinks about it for a second, but then he has to concede. He has to let small things occur the way they once did if he is to have any hope of fixing the big things. The least he can do is ensure that they happen safely and on schedule. I'll drive, he says, ignoring the looks of shock on Fred and George's faces. Let's go before the sun rises. Percy does not actually know how to drive, but as he'd predicted, his father does not either. All he has to do is press a few buttons and press his foot on the pedal, and the car shoots straight into the air. Another button, helpfully large and red, makes them all invisible. Fred and George whoop as Percy makes for little winging. George is in the front seat, examining a map. He's the best at directions and the most level-headed. Ron and Fred amuse themselves by rolling down the windows and sticking their heads out over Muggle London. All body parts inside the car, Percy snaps. We mustn't be seen. Is your greatest hero Mum, do you think, or Snape? Percy purposefully accelerates, and Ron snatches his hand back with a yip. Let a bird take some of your fingers, see if I care, he says, rolling his eyes. Then a grin. I would pay to see a Mum Snape fight, though. You're being surprisingly cool about this, Percy, George comments. Percy gives a little shrug. What, you thought only Charlie and Bill could be cool? I mean, yes, says Fred immediately. Ron, to his surprise, comes to his defense. Percy can be cool, he insists. This warms something inside of Percy that he had not known was cold. Thanks, Ron, and anyway, someone has to keep you three from killing yourselves. Look sharp, we'll be there soon. They wind their way through the dark and starry night, and Percy feels something a bit like peace. Perhaps this is what it is like to fly, though he doubts it, given that he has a comfortable seat, heating, and a seat belt. But if this is what Charlie feels in the air, he can understand why he never wants to come down. But come down they must, and Percy eventually makes a bumpy landing in the petunias outside number 4. He rolls off them and guiltily eyes their broken stalks. Caw, that one's got bars on his window, Fred murmurs, leaning out of the car window and craning his head. It's got to be that, Ron says, rolling down his own window. Go straight up. Percy gingerly presses the levitation button and slowly raises the car to the level of the window with bars. The sight makes him blink rapidly. Well, yes, he'd known those muggles were not nice people, but bars. From the backseat, Ron offers a coil of rope. I brought this, thought it might be useful. Surprisingly well reasoned, Percy says, navigating the car so that they are facing away from the window. Fred, not Ron, tie the rope to the bars. Of course, he can do it with magic, but he does not want to have the Ministry alerted to the presence of magic in a muggle neighborhood, even if he is not registered with the trace. Fred clambers precariously out of the window and onto the boot of the car, tying the rope tightly to the grille and to the bars. He slips back inside, and Percy revs the engine. The bars make a tremendous clank as they come away from the window. All 4 Weasleys hold their breath, but no lights turn on in the house. Harry's face appears in the window, thin and scared. Percy hurriedly backs up, and Fred, George, and Ron all slither through the open window. He waits, drumming his finger on the wheel, keeping a slow count in his head. He gives them exactly 10 minutes before he leaves the car in park and comes in after them. He's at 9 minutes when George begins shoving a trunk out of the window. Some maneuvering is required, but Percy aligns the car so that George can open the car door. He tumbles in with the trunk. Fred is next, and then Ron, and then Harry. And a giant, fleshy hand, wrapped around Harry's wrist. Relatio, Percy thinks instinctively, his hand on his wand in his pocket. Luckily, his training on nonverbal magic pays off, and Harry's uncle dances back as if burned, shaking his hand. Ron gives a tremendous pull, and Harry comes flying into the car, which wobbles precariously. Fred reaches over them both to slam the door shut, and Percy takes off, all four boys in the back yelling drive. It's several miles before everyone calms down. Percy is thinking nervously of ministry letters, though he reasons said letters will be sent straight to the Dursley residence and not addressed to P. Weasley, the borough. The ministry trace is not particularly accurate. More of the Weasley children would have experimented with underage magic had their mother not told each of them in turn, sternly, that any mischief could result in their father losing his job. Given that his mother does not work, that would be catastrophic for the family finances. Percy, Harry says finally, as if just now noticing him. You came too. Percy is feeling rather cheerful with his first successful shenanigan, as he believes the youth calls these sorts of adventures. He turns and grins at Harry. Harry, you look thin as a stick. We couldn't just leave you there, could we? Harry blinks at him with wide eyes, but a second later it turns into a grin. Their mother, of course, is furious. Percy had left a note, which did not seem to lessen her ire in the slightest. Ron gently pushes Harry forward. He's not had anything to eat in weeks, he says, looking sorrowful. Harry immediately begins to protest, but there's no denying the gaunt cast of his face. His mum switches tack abruptly. Asterisk Percy, Harry says cautiously a few days later, Ron tagging at his heels. Marley's oppressive mothering seems to have done Harry some good. He is significantly less pale and rather filled out. It would seem miraculous if Percy had not noticed his mother surreptitiously lacing Harry's morning pumpkin juice with a health potion. He had wondered at the time where she'd found either the time to brew it herself or the extra funds to purchase it. Regardless, it seems to be doing Harry some good. Hopefully, she was submitting her expense receipts to Dumbledore. What do you know about house elves? Beyond what you already know, Percy inquires, setting aside the homework he is preparing for the following year. Sixth year is nothing after the Owls, but he anticipates a serious increase in the time his extracurricular activities will likely take him. When Harry and Ron frown, Percy rolls his eyes. I thought Hermione was rather passionate about house elves. We're asking what you know, Percy, not what she knows, Ron says pointedly. Fred, for once without George, snickers appreciatively. Why the sudden interest, Ronikins? Planning to buy one, are we? Sod off, Ron says with disgust. You know we couldn't afford. He trails off and flushes crimson. Harry looks equally uncomfortable. Percy wonders idly when Harry had become aware of his immense wealth. Strange that a boy thought to be so giving never considers giving any of it away to those less fortunate. House elves are traditionally only property of the wealthy, yes, Percy confirms, but not for the reason you may think. Many house elves serve under very old contracts, contracts forged generations ago. Their offspring are bound at birth, and so it is difficult for a family without elves to procure any. A pair of elves would have to produce a brood in excess of what a family needs, and that family would have to deem it worthwhile to sell the elf to another family. Usually the old families can easily support another elf, so it is more a question of access rather than wealth. Unless you give them clothes, says Fred, flicking his handkerchief at Ron. Here you go, Ron, be free. Harry ignores Ron's yelp, leaning forward intently. So elves belong to those families, right? And they are usually rich families. Can they disobey their owners? Elves continue to have some amount of free will, Percy says thoughtfully. In truth, calling them property is limiting. But it is difficult for most elves to go against the will of their masters, both due to the nature of their binding contracts and to their inherent subservience. Why do you ask? Harry sends a look at Ron, who lies with surprising ease. You know how Hermione gets, he says with a shrug. Just going to be prepared. Percy eyes them both, but allows them to flee unimpeded. As long as they view him as an oblivious source of magical knowledge, he has some insight into their activities. He does not know why they would care so deeply about house elves, but he can't remember there being an elf of any particular significance to Harry in the first timeline, so perhaps it does have to do with Hermione. Do you think Ron ever gets angry? Fred asks, out of the blue. Percy raises an eyebrow and Fred continues quickly that Harry is so wealthy. Fred nods and then looks away. The twins became wealthy so quickly in the first timeline that Percy had never troubled himself unduly about how they grappled with the Weasleys' poverty. Neither Fred nor George ever seemed to want for things in the same way that Bill had, or Percy, or even Ron. But Percy supposes they also spent quite a bit of time destroying what they did have in the name of magic. "I dunno," he says, to excuse himself. "Ron's not exactly the most mature of the lot, is he?" "And I suppose Harry doesn't flaunt it," agrees Fred. "It's an understatement, and they both know it. Percy does think it's surprisingly uncharacteristic for Ron to be content merely to be Harry Potter's best friend, but perhaps Ron enjoys his proximity to fame, or he already is more mature than Percy gives him credit for being. Perhaps a smidgen of both. I don't think Harry has much access to that money," Percy says thoughtfully. "If I had been his parents, I would have set it up that his fees to Hogwarts are paid, but most of it would be under trust. It would be different, though, to have that money waiting for you," Fred says wistfully. "You could do anything." "And what would you do?" Fred hesitates, but then he gives Percy a conspiratorial smile. "Travel," he says, to Percy's surprise, who had been expecting the beginnings of the joke-shop plan. "Not like Bill or Charlie. I'd get an international portkey and spend a whole year going around the world after I graduate. It will be good for you to get some independence," Percy says approvingly. Fred gives him a look. "With George, obviously," he says, and something of the brief moment of intimacy between them is lost. "I would travel too," offers Percy, hoping to invite the camaraderie back. "Probably to university after university," Fred snorts and skips out, and Percy returns to his homework feeling disheartened. August 1992, Landon's house is just like him. Polished, imposing, and outwardly severe, but with a sense of humor. Landon's room, for instance, is outfitted tastefully in several shades of blue. A massive bookshelf takes up an entire wall, and as Percy peruses the titles, he sees several that are undeniably teenaged adventure dramas. Percy pulls out Aura Adrian and the Cursed Cave and raises an eyebrow at Landon. To his credit, the other boy does not even blush. He merely shrugs and says, "We can't all be so serious all the time, Percy. That one's good, too, Pirates." Percy rolls his eyes and carefully slides the book back in. "Whatever you say." Landon motions him to a small door next to the bookshelf. "I asked Flora to set up a temporary passageway between our rooms," he says, opening it. They step through to the guest room, which is much the same, but outfitted in tasteful red and gold tones. Percy wonders briefly if the Greengrass house elves repaint the room for each guest and judges it entirely plausible. "Thank you," Percy says politely. "Your hospitality is well received," Landon corrects. "I look forward to the chance to repay your family in kind." Percy repeats this obediently. He had asked Landon to correct his speech when applicable in a belated hope to train himself to use the correct pureblood speech patterns. Landon gives a small nod of approval. "When you meet my father, incline your head as a show of respect and say, 'My house awaits the chance to repay yours in kind.' Since you are representing your house and my father heads ours, that is more polite." He nods and commits this to memory. "Why didn't your parents teach you these things?" "Your mother was a Prowett. She undoubtedly would have been taught the old ways." Percy responds dryly. "They believe following the old ways betrays the peace for which they fought in the last war." Landon hesitates. "Don't tell my father that," he says. "In fact, don't mention the war at all. They have never spoken about the war." Percy realizes suddenly that he does not know where Landon declares allegiance in the Second War. He was never particularly close to Landon Greengrass in the last timeline. Certainly not close enough to be invited to his house. Landon seems comfortable with Percy's status in society and happily partners with a muggle-born in herbology. But he is a Greengrass. Well, Percy will have to keep an eye out for him if it becomes necessary. Asterisk Tobias Greengrass is even more intimidating than Landon at his most icy. Landon presents Percy to him in his leather-tooled study before supper, and Percy gets the distinct impression that the older man would not hesitate to fell even a close pureblood friend of his son's if necessary. Mr. Greengrass comments without standing, "Heir presumptive to the Prowett family, are you?" "Yes, sir," Percy says politely. He does not elaborate. Landon had warned him against babbling. Mr. Greengrass exhales thoughtfully. "You have 6 brothers, yes?" Why did Muriel choose you? Percy blinks both at the unexpected question and the informality of Muriel. I care about our family's heritage, he answers, hoping it is the correct thing to say. I wish to carry on the legacy of the Prowett family, and your brothers do not. This is easier to answer. My older brothers care about their own legacies. My younger brothers have not yet begun thinking about their responsibilities, I think. Tobias Greengrass stands. He wears glasses like his son, and on him they are refined and graceful. Percy suspects they have spells on them as well, likely detection spells at the very least. One question answered, albeit from several years ago. So there may be a claim to your title. Percy cannot entirely hold back a scoff. No, sir. You are sure of this? He thinks of Bill, of Charlie, of the twins, of Ron, of Ginny. There may be jealousy or anger, he allows, but not a claim. Mr. Greengrass's lips twitch. Not a successful one, you mean? Yes, sir. The older man continues to survey Percy. You are top of your class, I hear, he says, inclining his head toward a silent Landon. Studying to be an animagus, if my son is to be believed. After a prolonged silence, Percy realizes he is supposed to say something. I like magic, sir. This sounds woefully ridiculous to him, and he tries to avoid a visible wince. Magic is power. There's something driving every spell we cast, every ward we enact, and learning what that is gives us power. Something in Mr. Greengrass' face changes, but Percy does not know the other man nearly well enough to tell what. He tenses, but Mr. Greengrass only responds evenly. Well stated. I look forward to hearing more about you, Percy Weasley. Please do not hesitate to request aid if the Greengrass house may provide it. Percy inclines his head and says, just as Landon drilled him, my house awaits the opportunity to repay yours in kind, sir. And Tobias Greengrass smiles. The week with Landon is highly informative, not least because Percy watches every one of his casual gestures and commits them jealously to memory. From the way Landon imperiously summons a house elf to the way he holds his mug when he takes his afternoon tea. Imagine taking afternoon tea at the Burrow. Each of his mannerisms indicate his good breeding. Landon's mother, Amherst Greengrass nee Parkinson, but from the lesser branch, Landon confides, not the main house, is off in Paris or maybe Berlin. Landon appears unconcerned. She's always off somewhere, he says when Percy asks. She is always dreadfully busy. The house echoes in the combined absence of the Greengrass parents. Tobias Greengrass is technically home, but he emerges rarely, primarily for meals. He seems to enjoy quizzing his son, and Percy by extension. He's particularly impressed with Percy's grasp of potions. Luckily, Landon enjoys chattering, and he fills the days up with various adventures. They scour the library for more information on the founders. Percy directs research toward the locket and cup, figuring he may as well utilize the resource. Practice their dueling, his reflexes have improved some, but not by much. And try some of the more common rituals, both magical and social. Although he does not mention politics, Tobias brings it up on the last night of Percy's stay. They are having quail. It thrills him, just a little, and Percy is silently complimenting himself for the adept way he is handling the difficult bird and the delicate silverware when Tobias storms in and takes his seat at the head of the table. Bloody Augusta Longbottom, he grouses, gesturing to the house elf with a short wave. A plate instantly appears in front of him, the roast quail steaming gently. House elf magic. Incredible. Percy wants an elf so badly. Maybe he can buy Mimsy off McGonagall when the war is over and Dumbledore has died. Landon looks up with a smirk. This is clearly not a new topic for them. What's the old bird done now? Tobias does not correct his son for his informal language. He merely sighs and begins cutting into his meal. The old lady has never forgiven us for my father campaigning against her father for minister, he grouses. She convinced the light contingent to vote down my bloody bill. The education bill. Percy frowns. Sorry, which bill? Tobias eyes him over his fork. You're a smart boy, Percy, he says, setting it down. Son of a light wizard, too. Let's see what you think about the bill. It would mandate that all children, pureblood or mudblood, would have to complete 1 year of schooling before Hogwarts to study wizarding culture and history, and the class would be mandatory until our year thereafter. Percy is slightly thrown by the casual slur, but he doesn't react, or so he hopes. Instead, he thinks about the idea proposed. He actually agrees with it. The old families have an advantage, he says. They learn the rituals, the history, the culture. They are more familiar with magical theory just by being exposed to magic's intricacies. Tobias nods eagerly. Precisely. Landon pipes up, not wanting to be left out. And it is not a blood status thing, father. At least not entirely. I know plenty of half-bloods, even other purebloods, who do not learn about their heritage. Percy is the obvious example. He does not acknowledge the Kneazle in the room, though he does not fool himself to think Landon was not talking about him. Is it heritage, though, for Muggle-borns? Tobias leans back and looks at Percy assessingly. Perhaps not their heritage, but in a way, I do believe magic is their birthright, he says. Muggles are. Well, they're dirty. I think we can all agree we'd like never to interact with them. But mudbloods represent a possibility. They are muddy, if you will, as long as they are outsiders in our culture. Percy cannot help his eyes from flicking to Tobias's left arm, though he knows perfectly well the older man is wearing robes. Tobias catches him at it and smiles darkly, bringing his fingers together in a gentle arch. Anyone young can be misled, he says simply. Percy asks daringly, so you do not agree with their rhetoric? Will you leave if I say that I do? Tobias challenges, raising an eyebrow. Landon looks between him and Percy nervously. It is an interesting word you have chosen, rhetoric. I believed in a man named Riddle years ago. I thought he too shared my sentiments. Do I believe in senseless killing? Hardly. I am a powerful man, but I do flatter myself that I do not stray into brutality. Your ideal situation may be taking the children at birth, says Percy coldly, feeling his heart thrum in his chest. Tobias looks at him, perhaps to assess what Percy himself thinks of the idea. In all honesty, he does not entirely oppose it. Some measure of conformity would, it can be said, quell the dissent between groups. Perhaps, Tobias allows. And yourself? Landon tries to interject to diffuse the situation. Percy's a real swat, he tries. Likely will just quote theory at you. Both of the other men ignore him. Percy speaks slowly, aware that his words are carrying weight. Something must be done. He echoes Tobias's earlier words. I think we can all agree on that. I too am not one for brutality, if you will. Neither am I one for needless optimism. Our current system is flawed, but I will admit I do not yet know what I believe would be preferable. Education would be a fine start. Tobias picks up his fork to start eating, and some of the tension leaks out of the room. Tell that to Augusta, he says, his voice warmer. Bloody Bint suggested I was trying to indoctrinate an army of mudbloods. I told her I'd be happy for her to share her own history with the students, even teach a bloody class. Percy also slowly resumes eating, though he can no longer derive nearly as much enjoyment from the succulent quail. Percy spends the rest of the summer writing essays and practicing his animagus transformation. He's getting closer. He can now comfortably transform his hands and feet, but the two stress areas, head and torso, remain elusive. Professor McGonagall made him swear he wouldn't practice those without supervision, so he contents himself by focusing on his paws until the shift is instinctual. The philosopher's stone is beautiful. He dares not attempt the elixir of gold in the burrow, but he enjoys looking at the stone when everyone else has gone to bed. It glows faintly from within, a deep and somber red. The edges are smooth and geometric, and he feels the magic emanating off the cool surfaces. It feels different than other magical items he's encountered in the past, almost alive, though he cannot describe precisely why that may be. The elixir of gold is fascinating. The stone's power, he theorizes, is due to its ability to absorb and magnify magic with its own unique properties. Its own transformative force, Professor McGonagall may say. The elixir proceeds in two parallel steps. One brew that seems, as best as he can tell, to strengthen and heal the stone, and another to prepare lead to be transformed into gold. It's potions and transfiguration in one procedure, and he finds its simple but brilliant elegance inspiring and comforting in equal measure. For his birthday, he receives an owl to match his 13 outstandings. Seeing Hermes at the store is like greeting an old friend. Percy watches him stretch his tawny wings and feels, for a wild second, less alone. His parents look a bit surprised when he requests such an expensive gift, and not even for his 17th birthday, but he insists on Hermes with such vehemence that they indulge him. He begins to watch Ginny. He actually cannot recall how Ginny got the diary to begin with. He goes through her room, wincing his way through several non-Horcrux diaries that he fervently hopes she burns before she turns 14, or at the very least, before she dates Harry. Had he inadvertently ruined this timeline? Had something he'd done prevented her from receiving the diary, perhaps as a gift? And then his father picks a fight with Lucius Malfoy at a bookstore. Later, he wonders, had Lucius always been targeting Arthur? Had the elder Malfoy come to Diagon Alley with the intention of slipping the diary to his nemesis' youngest child? Or had it been a decision on a whim, or even an accident, the book tumbling out of Lucius' hands? Had Ginny battled the Dark Lord because his father was too stubborn to avoid a man too powerful to fight? In the moment, however, Percy burns with embarrassment. He cannot remember this happening the first time around, but he rarely spent trips to Diagon Alley sticking close to Ginny. Typically, he preferred to go on his own to the bookstore. This time, however, he has the dubious pleasure of watching his father humiliate himself. Actual fisticuffs. His father actually throws a punch at Lucius Malfoy, and Lucius Malfoy reciprocates. As a small consolation, Draco Malfoy looks equally horrified to see his father rolling around in the ground with Percy's, while a crowd of onlookers gawk and take photographs. One upside, Percy thinks to himself in the midst of his pained amusement of his father battling Lucius, is that Lucius won't allow any of these photographs to see the light of day. One wonders what they think is the positive outcome of this encounter, Percy mutters to himself. Draco actually smirks at this before he realizes he is smiling at a Weasley. Percy hastily speaks again before Draco can incite Ron into the same behavior as Arthur. I do not believe we have ever been properly introduced. Percy Weasley, I greet you in the name of our shared house. Draco frowns. Our shared house, he repeats dubiously. Have you lost your mind? Percy, what are you doing? Ron, behind, hisses. Our grandmothers were first cousins. Percy takes pleasure in informing Draco, who looks both thoughtful and appalled. One would consider it rude to not respond to such an introduction. Draco collects himself, perhaps spotting his father getting up from the ground, blonde locks askew. He extends a smooth hand and shakes Percy's. Draco Malfoy, I greet you in the name of our shared bewilderment. Percy gives a genuine smile. They quickly drop their hands before their father's return. Because Percy is standing so close to Draco, he easily spots Lucius withdrawing a small parcel from his coat pocket and adding it to the stack in Ginny's cauldron. Percy tunes out the insult, narrowing his eyes at the package. If that is the Horcrux, his mind leaps ahead. Why does Lucius Malfoy have it? A prominent Death Eater, a prominent pureblood, yes, but to be trusted with a Horcrux. He can't know of the Horcrux's true nature, otherwise he would not wantonly slip it to a Gryffindor student, especially a Weasley. Had he meant to open the chamber? Did he know Tom was back? No, he couldn't. He would never lose a Horcrux on the eve of his master's return. Why wouldn't Tom immediately begin rallying the troops? Perhaps he was too weak after his defeat. Why wait until now? Perhaps Lucius is aware of his return but not of his Horcrux. If you don't go back to your hovel, Weasel, I'll begin to think you want to come home with us. And we don't accept strays, says Draco nastily. Percy blinks. He's the only one still standing there. I spent part of the summer with Landon Greengrass, Percy responds absently as he scans for his family. They're in line to pay. He can already foresee what is going to be a humiliating episode. His mother is fingering the pouch with a look that he is very familiar with, suggesting that she will begin to consolidate their purchase within the next few minutes. He would not be surprised if they all share one set. Harry has also noticed, and is fingering his own pouch of gold, considerably heavier, Percy is sure, uncomfortably, as if wondering whether to offer to pay. Honestly, Percy would welcome it. It isn't as though Harry does not owe his family money, not after staying with them every summer for years. His house was grand, but I imagine Malfoy Manor is something to behold. I would like to see it one day. You're not like your brothers, are you? Draco says after a pause. Without the malice in his tone, he sounds much younger. Percy quirks his lips. If they were your brothers, would you want to be like them? The amused smirk on Draco's face mirrors Percy's own. Percy is sure, and he takes a moment to center himself before he very formally and exaggeratedly bids Draco adieu with his best pureblood manners, to which Draco responds in kind. Tonks and Draco would get along, he thinks absently, his mind still on Lucius Malfoy. Perhaps after the war he can introduce them. Percy debates with himself for several hours, but he finally decides to allow Ginny to write in the diary for the last week of summer. Though the decision does not quite Percy lets Ginny write in the diary for the last week of summer. He tells himself firmly that it takes several months for Tom to enslave her, and he cannot help but feel that it will be important for Ginny to know who Tom Riddle is. What if she tells Harry something important, something critical, something she learned when writing to Tom? Still, he tries to always watch her when she is writing in it, cataloguing the childish amusement that crosses her face every few minutes. Now that he is looking for it, it's obvious from the cadence of her writing that Ginny is holding on a conversation. He wonders what Tom says to Ginny, whether he is disappointed that his target is a mere 11-year-old girl. He's sure he'd prefer a more worthy adversary, someone with backbone and wit. Not that Ginny is not smart for her age, but she is 11. From the content of her other notebooks, Percy can say with some authority that she's unlikely to write anything to Tom worthy of much notice. He sees her sorted into Gryffindor with approval. That's the last of the sortings. He can relax now, and sits near enough to her at supper that he can monitor her integration into the house. He'd done the same thing with Fred and George and Ron, and Bill had done it to him. Ginny immediately strikes up conversation with the girl next to her, and Percy nods to himself quietly. She'll be happier this time around. September 1992, why in Merlin's saggy left tit Ron and Harry thought it was a good idea to fly to Hogwarts in a flying car. He towers over them in the common room, and they cower. "You will never do that again," he states in a cold whisper. "You betrayed my trust, Ron Harry. I expected better of you." That Fred and George come up behind him with high fives is unforgivable. Percy spends the rest of the night in a glower. As is his custom, Percy wakes early before breakfast the next day and reports to Snape to request another year of tutelage. As is his custom, Snape surveys him for several minutes before deigning to reply. "And why would I bother with your ineptitude, Mr. Weasley?" Percy holds up the pair of dragonhide gloves he'd found in the room last year. "I have the proper equipment, sir." Snape raises an eyebrow. Only a fool would call those pathetic excuses for gloves proper equipment. How goes your inspired foray into soul magic, then? "Ongoing," Percy responds promptly, ignoring the note of ridicule that Snape injects into the question. He hesitates, but takes the risk he calculated to be necessary. "I'd like to learn about the Philosopher's Stone, Professor." Snape's gaze sears. "Do you?" "It elongates life. It must have some tangential relation to soul magic, sir," Percy explains. "My brother tells me it was in Hogwarts all of last year." "Your sorry excuse for a brother would refrain from telling tales if he knew what was best for him," Snape says in what is almost a grumble. Percy does not deny this. "I would have liked to see it," he says wistfully. He hides a smile at the unimpressed look on Snape's face. "I never thought to study it before." I found a series of thought exercises in a book over the summer meant to aid a student in discerning the properties of the stone itself. He takes a series of neatly bound papers out of his bag. "I thought we could study both the elixir for life and the elixir of gold." "Fancy immortality, Mr. Weasley." "Only immense wealth, Professor," Percy quips, entirely truthfully. Snape holds out a hand for the proposal and flips through it idly. "A juvenile attempt at a research proposal, but an adequate starting point," he compliments Percy, who has to fight to keep a grin off his face. "And are we any more popular with our peers this year?" Percy rolls his eyes. "I spent part of the summer with Landon Greengrass. Oh, and I think Draco Malfoy might actually like me if you threatened him to admit it." Snape pauses in his perusal of the proposal to give Percy a sharp glance. "You met Tobias Greengrass." "He seemed impressed with me," Percy cannot help but say casually, as if he received the esteem of wealthy pureblood heads on a daily basis. Snape shakes his head slightly. "You are to inform me if he contacts you," he dictates to Percy. "Having Tobias acclaim is not necessarily something with which to be pleased. The same goes for Lucius Malfoy." "Sir, you are the son of Arthur Weasley and Marley Prowett, practicing dark magic and studying the soul," explains Snape, raising an eyebrow. "You would be a conquest for any man like Tobias, I suppose Lucius included. You may think of yourself as a wolf, Weasley, but you are but a rabbit. Do not let yourself be trapped in their jaws." Percy wrinkles his nose at the thought but nods. It is unlikely either will contact him anyway, so it is an easy promise to make. Snape gives a short nod in confirmation. Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 4 in the afternoon, he dictates. Percy tries not to be surprised that Snape knows when his free periods are. Ingredient collection is necessary. Yes, sir. Percy turns to go. And how proceeds the Patronus? Percy's face immediately sours. Snape looks delighted. A continued failure, I take it. No need to ask about the animagus transformation. I dare say one shan't come without the other. Ongoing, Professor, Percy corrects. By the end of the term, I'll have at least one completed. That you do, or I may continue to doubt why I sully myself with your presence, Snape says and motions him out. His failures in mind, Percy stops by McGonagall's office instead of heading directly to breakfast. She's still inside, gathering up the schedules to hand out to her house in the Great Hall. Mr. Weasley, how was your summer? I told Professor Snape I'd have either my Patronus or Animagus by the end of the term, he says without preamble. He needs her to know the stakes of this term. Professor McGonagall coughs to hide a smile, but he sees it anyway. Well, that may have been premature of you, Mr. Weasley. Both are incredibly complex pieces of magic. How frequently can we meet this year? Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays. My Saturdays are my own, Mr. Weasley, she responds chidingly. You may take the opportunity to practice your Patronus on the weekend, however. Why don't you ask Professor Flitwick for help? He tells me you no longer take tutelage in charms. Percy has never warmed to Professor Flitwick, who seems to watch him more closely than Percy thinks he merits. He shrugs one shoulder as McGonagall ushers him out of the office, locking the door behind them. I've potions tutorial 3 times a week as well, he explains, as they make their way down to the Great Hall. I am not nearly as passionate about charms as I am about transfiguration or potions. She bestows upon him a warm smile. More passionate about transfiguration, I hope. What are you attempting with Professor Snape? We're beginning by studying the Philosopher's Stone. Because I learned from somebody that it was here at Hogwarts last year. Professor McGonagall snorts. Albus should have obliviated all 3 of them. Your brother is quite a troublemaker, Mr. Weasley. Which one? Percy asks dryly. After the stone, we're to look at the portraiture potion, though I don't reckon Snape will let me actually try it. I also wanted to ask him about healing potions, since I have a theory they dabble in soul magic as well. McGonagall nods decisively to herself as they reach the Great Hall. I can't lose to Severus Snape, she says, turning to him. We'll get your animagus finished by December, and you can tell him that it's a promise from Minerva McGonagall. Ron makes up for the car incident slightly by defending Hermione in some unspecified incident with Draco Malfoy, calling her a mudblood. Percy hears all about it from Oliver after practice, and Percy makes a note to congratulate Ron and advise him on different spells he can use on Draco that won't result in him retching slugs. Ginny writes in the diary constantly. Percy watches her at breakfast, feeling concerned. She looks so small, the bags under her eyes pronounced. He's all but decided he can't have the chamber opened. The risk is far too high. It's unlikely that all of the potential victims will seek refuge in reflection, and he can't have the life of a Hogwarts student on his head. He'll have to take it from her, and earlier than he thought. He introduces Ginny to Myrtle. Myrtle beams at her and spends the entire afternoon chatting with her about Harry Potter. Percy, working on his essays in the corner, rolls his eyes to himself, but does not interfere. I've noticed you writing in that diary quite a lot, Ginny, he tells her as they leave Myrtle to her own devices and begin walking back to the common room. She deflects this easily. I can't believe you're friends with Moaning Myrtle. How did that even happen? Percy studies her carefully. Her skin is pale, but she does not yet look gaunt and unhealthy. Perhaps Tom will need more time to establish a hold on her. He thinks that this brief brush with the Dark Lord will help to stabilize the timeline and give her something to bond with Harry about later. He can't be sure that it isn't important for Ginny to have something of a window into teenaged Tom Riddle. But this time he'll watch carefully. As soon as it looks like Tom is exerting his hold, he'll step in. I really think you should spend the weekend with your friends, he persists. Or even talk to one of the ghosts or portraits. They get lonely and they're full of stories. Or we can go to the library together. Ginny flushes and looks down. I don't have any friends, she admits in a tiny voice. Percy has an inspired idea. Spend the weekend with Fred and George, he says encouragingly. They've missed causing havoc with you these past few years. Now you can all do magic too. He goes to breakfast with brilliant golden hair and wears it, if not proudly, then without complaint. Landon stops by to tell him he looks ridiculous, but Ginny is laughing, and so he merely raises a pained eyebrow. Lockhart is as much of an idiot as the first time around. More of an idiot, since now Percy has proof that he's a complete fraud. Why does Dumbledore continue to hire such utterly useless professors to teach such an essential topic? As the last year made abundantly clear, Dumbledore is perfectly aware that the Dark Lord is not dead, and for all he knows, the Shade has made off with the Philosopher's Stone. It does not take a time traveler to foresee war may be in the imminent future. Perhaps the younger kids would be fine, shielded by Hogwarts or their youth or their parents, but Percy's generation would be on the front lines, whether by choice or necessity. They deserved better instruction. How many of his peers would have survived the war had they learned the necessary skills to defend themselves? October 1992, Myrtle floats ahead of him. This is boring, she complains, flying through a large, ornate cabinet. Why do we keep looking through here? Percy is meticulously righting her wrongs and continuing to tabulate the contents of the room of hidden things. He's claimed several useful things for his own, and so he rather enjoys these little outings. They are like excursions into Hogwarts' past. Perhaps he ought to be a historian if he finishes off this war alive. He can befriend the pretty muggle-born librarian at the ministry. It occurs to him that she actually may be his age, though physically there would be a bit of a gap. It's useful, he says. Who knows what could be in here? Think about it. Maybe the sword of Gryffindor, Myrtle says, brightening. Percy purses his lips. Doubtful, but possible. Any of the Founder's artifacts, really, he says encouragingly. Keep an eye out. How was your summer? Myrtle keeps a few paces ahead, making a desultory attempt at searching. It was productive. Only 2 more years and you'll be gone, Myrtle wails, not giving him a chance to finish. Percy, what am I going to do? I'll be so dreadfully bored, nobody ever comes to visit me. Percy closes his gaping mouth and then just as quickly opens it again. That's hardly true. You told me girls visit you all the time. They tell you their secrets. You don't even tell me your secrets, she sniffs. And their secrets are boring. Sometimes I want more than, ooh, he's so cute, and oh, I'm so lonely. But Myrtle, you love those types of secrets, Percy feels compelled to point out. He should know. He'd been hearing second-hand reports of them for years. She floats faster. And there'll be no more adventures, and no more maps, and no more occlumency. Just my stupid old bathroom. Percy walks faster to keep up. Myrtle, he says pleadingly, you'll find something to do. Another student will come along and be just as interesting. Harry Potter goes to school here now, don't you know? She sniffs, considering this. I suppose, but it won't be the same without you, Percy, and you can't even write. I'll write, he promises, without the faintest idea of how to deliver on that. Mimsy can deliver the letters to you, but I can't write back. Myrtle wails and promptly bursts into tears. Oh, bugger. Do you still want to be a ghost, Myrtle? Percy asks cautiously after several minutes of Myrtle metaphorically drenching the room. Luckily, there are no pipes present, and so her tears merely drip cool ice down his shoulder. I've not got an option, do I? Is her mumbled response. Percy narrows his eyes. That can't be true, he thinks out loud. What can be created can be destroyed. You know that, Myrtle. If you really don't want to be a ghost anymore, if you just want to rest, we can figure out how to make that happen. But if you do want to continue being a ghost, I promise you that you'll find something interesting to do. The Dark Lord will eventually invade the castle. That should be plenty interesting for Myrtle. She stops crying and considers this. You have to find out, the ghost says with increased urgency. I'm not saying yes, but I know you, Percy Weasley. You're going to graduate from here and find something interesting to do, and you'll forget all about me. I want you to figure out how to let me rest, and tell someone in the castle before you graduate. Nearly 1 month of school, and he has not 1 but 3 deadlines to meet, not to mention a bloody Dark Lord. He feels a headache coming. But it's Myrtle, the ghost, who somehow has become his closest confidant. He thinks of himself trapped in 50 years of lingering and shudders. I promise, he says solemnly, and even though he is all but promising Myrtle to kill her, she raises a gleaming head and smiles at him. Friday lessons with Snape, he finds, are surprisingly intimate. The week draws to a close. The castle feels emptier. everyone off to begin their weekends, and Snape seems tired, almost more mellow. This October has been a chilly one, and Percy arrives for his weekly lesson to find Snape simultaneously brewing no fewer than 10 large cauldrons of pepper-up. He barely acknowledges Percy's presence. Complete 10 inches on the dual properties of the stone as an reactive agent as well as protective, Snape says, waving a hand to the corner. Percy sets his things on the desk and ventures, "Perhaps first I could help, sir." "And why would I subject the fine young minds of Hogwarts to your abysmal definition of help, may I ask?" Percy approaches cautiously. "Because you do not overly care whether they live or die." This succeeds in producing an actual smirk of amusement from Hogwarts' most feared professor. Percy files away the memory to use during Patronus practice. "Indeed, Mr. Weasley, headache draft, if you will. No more than 3 cauldrons. I cannot stomach an explosion at this hour. It's barely 4, but the afternoon has already turned into evening, the ensconced flames the only source of light in the room." Percy sets up 5 cauldrons. Snape eyes them but does not comment, which Percy takes to be a win. When his draft is bubbling a merry cerulean, Percy dares to make conversation. "Is this not Madame Pomfrey's task, sir?" Snape allows an expression of displeasure to cross his face. "One would think, but our esteemed headmaster chose not to hire a matron proficient in brewing. Seems a bit unfair," he says, stirring continuously. He tests out a bit of non-verbal magic on the other cauldrons and watches with satisfaction as their stirrers also begin twirling in the air. "You'll need to learn wandless magic, too," Snape comments with a nod. "What's the point of all of this, Weasley?" Percy tries for another joke. "World domination." Snape's unimpressed look informs him that 1 joke per session is plenty. "You're too frightened of the unknown for world domination," he says dismissively. "But what is your drive?" "I know you are not as passionate about soul magic as you claim." Percy gives an uncomfortable shrug. "Ambition," he says uneasily. "Not directed anywhere yet. I like the challenge. I want to be equipped for whatever is out there." "And what is out there?" Percy shrugs again. "You tell me, sir." Silence falls as they return to their brewing. Percy finishes the first set of headache draft and bottles them into 20 neat vials, 4 per cauldron. Merlin, no wonder Snape looks stressed. To supply enough stock for the entire school is a Herculean effort. "How are your studies of dark magic progressing?" Snape says conversationally after he too begins a new batch. Percy flinches. "Sir." Snape raises an eyebrow. "I did not say your practice, merely your studies," he breathes silkily. "Adequate," Percy says honestly. He has not tried many more dark spells, but he has found he has a talent for the rituals. They are a combination of magic and potions and arithmancy, and he finds the process of setting them up and completing the necessary steps to be both fascinating and calming. Dark spells are wilder. He always feels somewhat unsafe when he endeavors to cast one of the spells in his books. "Do try not to lose yourself to the thrall this year," Snape lectures. "You have much to accomplish if you have a hope of achieving your goals of portraiture, if they indeed are genuine goals, and not merely a front, shall we say, for other ambitions." Percy hopes very much that his face does not betray him. "It is true I have not yet decided what I want to do after Hogwarts," he says in an effort to distract. "It is unlikely I will become a portrait artist, yes. But something about that potion has fascinated me since I first saw the instructions. It is a goal of mine, at least for this year." "Do your parents know of your dabbling in the dark arts?" Percy snorts. "I hope not. I doubt I would still be alive if they knew." "How did you discover the Mirror of Erist?" "I first discovered it with Ron and Harry," Percy responds, thrown slightly by the non sequitur. He has found that Snape is unlikely to scold him for his casual bending of the rules, and so tries to be as honest as possible. "Harry snuck out of the dormitory over Christmas and somehow found the mirror." "Typical," Snape drawls. "I suppose the boy who lived so charmed you that you followed him on the errand." "I followed him because I do not want him to lead my brother into trouble," Percy snaps back. "Harry obviously has his own ideas of what he wants to do, and following the rules does not appear to be a concern of his. Ron, for whatever reason, is loyal to Harry. They're 12. They're both idiots. The least I can do is make sure Ron doesn't get hurt." This quiets Snape, if only for a second. "You think a friendship with Harry Potter is liable to hurt Ronald?" Percy smiles bitterly. It may be the most important relationship in Ron's life, save perhaps his friendship and blossoming romance with Hermione Granger. It is also, without question, the most dangerous. Has it not already? Snape acknowledges him with a mirthless smile. I followed them, and I saw the mirror. Separately, I learned they had seen the Cerberus, and they mentioned there was a trapdoor. And you had to follow, of course. Typical Gryffindor disregard for the rules. You spent your fair share of the year skulking around the door. Snape narrows his eyes. I am a professor of this school, and you are a mere child, he hisses. Professor, Percy dares, was Quirrell harboring the Dark Lord. Silence. A dangerous accusation. Snape breaks the silence finally. Percy returns to stirring with a bit more force than necessary. I heard enough from Ron that I could piece it together, he explains, feeling his fingers tingle with anticipation. What will Snape tell him? Dumbledore told Harry that Quirrell was hiding the Dark Lord in his turban. He also said the Mirror of Erest was hiding the Philosopher's Stone. Ergo, the Dark Lord possessed Quirrell to try and get the Philosopher's Stone. He stops staring and meets Snape's eyes. He's not dead, is he, Professor? Snape's intrusion into his mind is subtle, but Percy feels it, the way tendrils snake around the inside of his skull. Without missing a beat, he throws up his shields. Your skills in occlumency are worse than your questionable attempts at deduction, Snape says, pinning Percy with a stilling glare. Who taught you this skill? I taught myself out of a book. You must have been practicing for years to reach this level. I thought my skills were abysmal. Do not deflect the question, Weasley. Percy crosses and uncrosses his toes inside his shoes. He should have known better than to bait Snape, to get him to reveal something about the Dark Lord. Percy may trust Snape, but Snape thinks of Percy only as a precocious student and tolerable company. He had to tread carefully now. I learned about it when I was researching soul magic in my second year, he says, in what is not exactly a lie. Soul magic and mind magic are similar. Professor McGonagall even discussed it with me. I thought I might as well learn to protect my mind. What secrets do you have? Snape's tone is deceptively light, but Percy is not fooled. Well, I am practicing dark magic, he says, hoping the inherent humor in his words will be sufficient to distract Snape. Not something I wanted Dumbledore to pick out of my head. And do you have reason to believe Headmaster Dumbledore practices legilimency? Always assume the worst of your enemies, Percy parries. You've told me that. Snape leans forward victoriously. Interesting that you consider Headmaster Dumbledore one of your enemies. Percy swallows. Exchanging wordplay with Snape is like swimming in the ocean, novel and fun for the first few minutes, and then abruptly dangerous and unpleasant as one becomes aware of what else may be swimming besides. I do not have many allies, Percy says honestly. All else are potential enemies. It's an interesting world view for a young Weasley child, Snape says thoughtfully. He never ceases his practiced gestures over the multitude of cauldrons around him, but Percy does not doubt for a second that Snape could have him tied and silenced in a second's time. Where did you pick that up? A war, he thinks. With 5 brothers, you have either allies or enemies. He tries to deflect again. Snape pins him with a beady stare. The protections you sought to shield your mind would only serve to inform me that you have a secret, he says softly, dangerously. I may not be able to rip it from your mind without risking damage to your brain, but you will tell me, Weasley. Percy gulps and stays silent. Snape's lips stretch once again into something resembling a smile. I am patient, he says, settling back to his brewing. But I do tend to achieve my goals. I look forward to learning your secret, Weasley. Your cauldron is about to boil over. I told you that you could handle no more than 3. Percy starts and moves quickly to save his potion. He lost that round. That much is apparent. As October draws to a close, windy and wet, and entirely unpleasant, Percy allows himself to be convinced by Myrtle into attending Nick's death day party. At the very least, he counsels himself as he neatens his workspace in Myrtle's bathroom and wards it under a heavy set of spells. It will be an interesting anthropological perspective. Perhaps he'll gain some clarity on whether banishing Myrtle as a ghost would be the right or the wrong thing to do. He finds it difficult to clear his mind as he walks down the drafty corridor with Myrtle at his side. He does not have nearly enough time these days. He thinks enviously of his first few years at Hogwarts, where he would spend hours practicing wandless magic or reading about souls. There were a number of preparations he wished he'd undertaken then, But even when one had hindsight in spades, it was not enough. He's still working on his animagus, of course, and his patronus. Snape is now regularly and openly tries to catch him unawares and dive through his occlumency shields, which forces him to practice building his shields several times a day. He is monitoring Ginny very closely to determine whether he should step in and take the diary. He's rereading all of his old notes about Tom Riddle, trying to plan his strategy for speaking to him. He's continuing to search the room of hidden things for the diadem. And he's slowly gathering the ingredients he would need for the elixir of gold, one mail order at a time. He averages around 5 hours of sleep a night, and he's taken to glamoring his appearance after McGonagall warned him she would no longer oversee his lessons if he could not take care of himself. Spelling his appearance to be calm and unaffected and healthy, at least that was one skill he picked up during the Dark Lord's reign, proved to be useful now. Percy. He stops suddenly at the sound of Ron's voice. The trio is standing in front of him, politely holding plates of rotting food. Percy blinks, taking a moment to digest the scene. There are more ghosts than he's ever seen in one place. Ghosts he had never heard of or ghosts he had merely glimpsed over his years at Hogwarts. Even the Grey Lady hovers in one corner, while the Baron stalks another. There are groaning tables filled with rotting food, a cruel facsimile of the Halloween feast going on below. "You didn't tell me you were friends with Harry Potter," Myrtle says both coquettishly and completely inaccurately, as they have had an uncomfortably large number of conversations about the small boy hero. Percy rolls his eyes. "Down, Myrtle, he's too young for you." Myrtle pouts, enjoying the reddening flush of Harry's face. "For now. Ron, Harry, it is my utmost pleasure to introduce Hogwarts' most annoying ghost," Percy says with a sigh. "Myrtle Warren Ravenclaw." "I told you that Percy would be here," sniffed Hermione triumphantly. "Forgive me for not believing you and Gin when you told me Percy was friends with Moaning Myrtle," Ron says, turning on Hermione. Percy sees the wobble of Myrtle's translucent lip and acts quickly. "Myrtle, go tell Nick we're here, will you?" When she's gone, Percy glares at Ron. "I know you're 12, but do you think you could have the common decency to not refer to someone by a humiliating nickname to their face?" "You called her annoying." "She's my friend," Ron scoffs. "We're back at the same question," he points out. "Why are you friends with Moaning Myrtle?" Percy exhales in irritation. "I don't know what you want to hear, Ron, that I was a lonely 11-year-old. That Myrtle is easy to talk to, and I didn't abandon her once I made other friends." "You couldn't find a normal friend. Leave it." Harry breaks in, his voice suddenly hard. Percy looks at him in surprise, but he's looking only at Ron. "You can't limit who he's friends with, or say they're not normal." The two boys stare at each other uneasily, but the tension is broken by Hermione snickering. "I'm sorry," she says, grinning. "It's just, I'm thinking of my friends from Muggle primary school, and what they'd say if they knew who I was friends with now. None of us are normal to them." Even Ron smiles at that, and Harry retreats into the quiet shell he normally carries around with him. Percy eyes him speculatively. It's always interesting to see Harry show signs of his future character. The rest of the party passes fairly amicably. Myrtle only sheds tears once, when Peeves starts to tease her, but the Baron is there to scare him off before he takes it too far. Percy wonders whether the ghosts think of themselves as friends, as family, or whether those labels no longer occur to them. They must, though. The ghosts clearly have thoughts and feelings and relationships, allegiances and loyalties. They may be dead, but there is a sort of life here, or something approximating it. As the party winds on, Percy finds himself surprisingly hungry. Fully aware of his tendency to skip meals, he's tasked himself with eating 3 regular meals per day, preferably in the Great Hall so he can make an appearance. Normally, he eats without thinking: vegetables, brown rice, or pasta, and whatever the healthiest protein option for that day appears to be. It has been a while since he's felt any sort of desire. Perhaps it is the ghosts reminiscing over their favorite meals, or the unchecked looks of longing on their faces as they float through the rotting offerings on the table. Percy eyes Ron, and then figures the risk is worth it. Percy has much less of a reputation for being a stickler for the rules in this timeline. He hopes, and since McGonagall did not seem him worthy enough for the prefect badge, he feels much less of a responsibility to hold up the rules. "Do you all know where the kitchens are?" "Are we allowed in the kitchens?" Hermione says keenly. "When you're a senior student," Percy says half-truthfully. No professor, save perhaps Snape or Vector, is liable to take points from an older student making a trip to the kitchens for a snack between meals, but it is not explicitly allowed. This mollifies Hermione, and he begins to lead them out of the dark corridor. He's engaged in an interesting conversation with Hermione, whose ideas on house elf freedom are naive but well-intentioned, and Ron, who is no less disparaging of them this year than he was last year, when Harry stops suddenly, jerking his head to the left as if scenting blood. "Did you all hear that?" Percy frowns intently at Harry and slides his wand out of the holster. "What?" "That voice." Harry trails off, and his eyes widen behind his round glasses. "There." "We don't hear anything, mate," Ron says cautiously. "It's going to kill," Harry whispers, horrified, and then he's off like a spell careening from a drunk wizard's wand. Percy shares a bewildered look with Ron before all three of them race after Harry by mutual agreement. They skid past the stairs to the entrance hall, hearing the low murmur of the feast concluding, Percy's stomach growls, and then follow Harry's tiny figure up the stairs. They come to an abrupt halt on the second floor, directly across from Myrtle's bathroom. "Harry, what in Merlin's name?" Ron begins, only to trail to a halt. Percy looks in horror as the words he'd hoped never to see drip in blood on the halls. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Ginny. "Where's Ginny?" Percy demands urgently, turning to clasp Ron's arms. Ron shakes him off, his freckles staining against his pale skin. "She went to the feast, I think." "Percy, is that Mrs. Norris?" Percy spins around and takes in Mrs. Norris' stiff figure. They're too far away to tell if she's petrified or dead. They're all four frozen, the silence broken only by a cruel, gleeful shout. "Enemies of the air, beware. You'll be next, mudbloods." Percy turns with a scowl. Draco catches sight of his face and cowers slightly, backing into his thug of a lackey. Percy takes a step toward him, joined by Harry and Ron, when they are stopped by the sight of what seems like half the school packed into the corridor. There's a pause, and then Snape sweeps to the front, forbidding as always. He takes in the scene and then looks directly at Percy. The now familiar feeling of his mental intrusion slides into Percy's mind, but he can't even bring himself to do anything more than expel him. He'd failed Ginny again. He'd had breakfast with Ginny that very day, and aside from some circles under her eyes, she'd seemed perfectly fine. He had to get the diary tonight. "It was him," howls Argus Filch, pointing directly at Harry. "Don't be foolish, Argus," McGonagall sniffs, looking instead to Percy. "Mr. Weasley, what happened here?" Percy shakes himself and then opens his mouth to answer. He can at least protect Ron from detention. "Ron, Hermione, Harry, and I were at Sir Nicholas's death day party," he explains, hearing a murmur break from the crowd. "You can ask nearly any of the ghosts at Hogwarts to attend to our presence. We were hungry, so we began to walk back to the feast." He pauses and feels the burn of Harry's desperate stare on his back. "We heard something, a loud noise, almost like a crash. We came to see what it was, and we saw the blood." Snape narrows his eyes. "Pinpointed the scene of noise with unerring accuracy," he says silkily. Percy throws him an unimpressed glance. "We just kept walking down the corridor and stopped when we saw this." McGonagall waves her wand over them, shaking her head in concern. "And you didn't fetch a professor?" "I thought it was Peeves, Professor," Percy says innocently. "He was teasing Myrtle at the party, and I thought he may have come by the bathroom to torment her some more. Why are they opposite Myrtle's bathroom anyway?" He hopes she's unharmed. Dumbledore arrives then and sweeps the whole thing aside. Percy listens with half an ear, thinking, there's something here, something that doesn't add up, something important that he's forgotten. His head jerks back up when he hears Dumbledore pronounce Mrs. Norris dead. Dead. With a flash, it comes back to Percy. There's no water on the floor. In the original timeline, Myrtle must have flooded the bathroom. Perhaps Ron or Peeves did tease her to the point of actual sobs. In this timeline, Percy has spent several years buffering her self-esteem, and her outbursts are significantly less common. She may even still be at the party, and now Mrs. Norris was dead. Thank Merlin she's only a cat. They are released after Dumbledore questions them more closely. Snape's dark glare promises retribution, both to Percy and to Harry. The trio is silent on their way back to the tower, though he knows they are exchanging meaningful, or perhaps just bewildered, looks the entire way back. Whispers start when they step through. Percy's yearmates look seconds away from surrounding him, but he looks pointedly at the 3 second years he is chaperoning and they back off. He settles the trio in a set of large, squashy couches and tells them to stay there. Ginny is nowhere to be seen. He leaves the three behind and reluctantly approaches his yearmates. Theodora, can you go into the girls' dormitory and see if my sister is there? Only if you promise to tell us what's going on. Her face is tight and drawn. After I make sure my siblings are fine, yes, he says irritatedly. Why can't everyone just get out of his way? Theodora reappears with a pale Ginny. Percy leads her over to Ron, ensuring she sits on the sofa. He fetches her a blanket from the basket in the corner near the fire and spreads it over her when she makes no move to take it from her. Did you not go to the feast, Ginny? Hermione asks warmly, putting her hand on Ginny's shoulder. Percy notices the flinch, which echoes painfully in his stomach. Ginny shakes her head. She looks haunted, overwhelmed, and once again Percy feels incredibly guilty. He'd watched her this time, too. Just yesterday, he'd sat next to her at lunch and heard her cheerfully recounting her latest flying lesson. Is there something you want to talk about, Ginny? She meets his eyes for a long second before she shakes her head rapidly. It's a mark of how unsettled she is that she does not react to Harry's presence, even when Ron begins to question him about the voices in low tones. Fred and George arrive and steal a pillow from Ron, though the act seems more of an automatic nervous tick than a true effort to tease their younger brother. They exchange worried looks with Percy, also clearly noticing the state of Ginny. He tries to impress upon them non-verbally that they have to do a better job of watching her. He had specifically told them to bring her to the feast. Hermione, however, has her eyes on Percy. What's the Chamber of Secrets, and who's the heir, and why do they hate Muggleborns? Silence falls, not just among their small group, but in their corner of the common room. Theodora and Mariana inch closer, Henry and Alex not far behind. Percy sighs and adjusts his glasses. Much to his frustration, he does not know much more than what is said in Hogwarts, a history, but at least he can answer without worrying about the future too much. Each of the founders were said to have left legacies, he begins, marshalling his thoughts. Objects, weapons, knowledge. The Sorting Hat is famously thought to have been Gryffindor's. If you do some research, there are numerous things thought to have been left by the founders, jewelry, artifacts, amulets, and so on. He sees some nods. This is familiar to most wizarding families. Each of the founders also, in theory, could have left an impact on the school itself. It is very possible each had their own set of chambers or private rooms while they resided here that presumably housed these legacies, or at least their belongings. None of these have been found, of course. The castle is over 1,000 years old, and as we all know, it has a mind of its own. Furthermore, the headmaster can slightly change the layout as needed to fit the needs of the student body. Is the Chamber of Secrets Slytherin's? Hermione leans forward, looking fascinated. Of course she would. This would all be new to her. Percy shrugs one shoulder uncomfortably. It's a rumor. It's never been proven. Even if there is a Chamber of Secrets, it's likely to be warded against any intruders, or more likely, completely empty. You must remember that over 1,000 years of students walked these halls. It's likely if the Chamber of Secrets existed, it would have been found by now, or that if it does exist, it is buried far beneath what we can access. Not if you need the heir to find it, Harry says quietly, darkly. Ginny flinches. Percy doesn't miss it. Perhaps, he allows. All four founders had children, and so presumably at least one heir exists for each house. However, once again, it's been over 1,000 years. We've lost the records of who may be the direct descendants of each founder. It's more likely that many of the old pureblood families are in some way related to at least one founder, just by virtue of the British wizarding community being fairly small. And Muggleborns? Hermione asks in a small voice. He tries to smile at her reassuringly. Well, it's true that Slytherin did not want Muggleborns in the school, although we do have to remember that times were different then. Muggles were actively rounding up wizards and witches to kill, and Muggleborns often chose their community over their magic. However, many who believe in his ideology continue to distrust Muggleborns or feel a sense of superiority, and yes, many of them belong to families that traditionally sought Slytherin. Ron snorts. Never trust a snake. Percy gives him a stern look. Not all blood purists are Slytherin, and not all Slytherins are purists. It's said that Slytherin kept a monster to hunt Muggleborns, and that the monster still lives. But I, personally, find that patently ridiculous. To begin, Slytherin was an immensely powerful wizard. He could have attacked Muggleborns himself, rather than resorting to using some sort of beast. Furthermore, even if he had some sort of monster that was over 1,000 years ago, very few, if any, magical animals could possibly live that long. Who do you think wrote that message? George asks, looking suddenly very young. Fred shifts closer and presses his shoulder into his twin. Percy watches Ginny flinch again, harder than before. An imitator, he says with authority. Someone seeking to intimidate, perhaps. I wouldn't worry. Muggleborns are safe at Hogwarts. Dumbledore will not let any student be harmed. They killed Mrs. Norris, though, Ron says darkly. Ginny shudders and begins to sob. Fred and George quickly each throw an arm around her. Percy looks around at the silent groups of people listening to him soberly. His eyes seek out Henry, house prefect, who stands still and serious. A scare tactic, he says finally. We do not need to be scared. We're Gryffindors. Keep your eyes open and stay in groups. You won't be hurt, but some people may be emboldened by this and try to hex Muggle-born students. Please go to your prefects if you encounter any trouble. With that, he stands. He needs time to think.